Welcome to On the Bench, the My Catholic Library blog, where you can see the traditional bookbinding work that I do, whether that's to create a new edition of a Catholic classic, or to bring back to life some old treasure that really has seen better days. And sometimes in that second category, someone will ask me to take a look at a book or consult with them, and it really is a lesson in how sometimes a simple problem doesn't have a simple solution. So the book we're taking a look at today is the St. Andrews Daily Missal. Maybe some of you have heard of it. It's very well known for reasons we'll come on to. But the ribbons have gone, all but one. It had 4 to begin with. There's only stubs of ribbons left, apart from one. So it's a simple ribbon replacement. Except in this case, not so much. But before I get on to why it's actually going to be more difficult to replace the ribbons, we'll take a look at the book for those who aren't familiar with it. Now, I know that this is actually one of the more popular traditional Latin Mass, extraordinary form hand missals, and there's very good reasons for that. The St. Andrews Daily Missal is really the work of one man, Don Gaspar Lefebvre, who was a Benedictine monk, actually travelled the world quite extensively to different monasteries and settled in Belgium at the monastery of St. Andrews, hence the name of the book. And Don Gaspar Lefebvre was really, if only for producing this, a very important figure in the liturgical movement at the start of the 20th century, end of the 19th, start of the 20th century. And what the liturgical movement wanted was for people to be formed more deeply by the Mass and other liturgies of the Church. To engage them in that formation was the goal of Dom Lefebvre's Missal, as he spells out here in the introduction. And so there is music in the back of the most common Gregorian chant settings for the Mass, and in the front for Vespers and Compline. And every season, and plenty of feast days, are prefaced by Dom Lefebvre's commentary on the significance of this event in the life of the Church. But the most engaging of all, for me at least, are the illustrations. This missal is probably the most artistic hand missal ever published. It is simply chock full of images, all created by artist and academic René de Cramé specifically for this missal, and I think they are stunning. There are simply way too many of them to include even a fraction in this video, but I photographed, I think, a representative sample for the written blog post about this book repair, and there's a link to that below if you want to see more of them. I did want to draw your attention to what I think is the jewel in this artistic crown, the timepiece of the Passion, a diagram of the last day in our Lord's earthly life. This is placed within the long Passion Gospel for Palm Sunday, and it shows where our Lord was at what hour, given in modern timekeeping and in the Roman reckoning, so it helps you make sense of the at about the 6th hour kind of passages that are in that long Gospel reading. While I've obviously seen depictions of saints in hand missals for feast days and even symbolic representations of the different seasons of the Church's year, I've never seen anything like this in a hand missal, and it's a great example of why the St. Andrews Daily Missal is really worth acquiring if you haven't already. As for the particulars of this one edition, there's really only one, but a very intriguing one it is, because in the very front of the book is pasted in this little card that reads, "From the Lady Abbess, with every kind wish for your future, 1st of June 1931, and this is from St. Mary's Abbey in East Bergholt." Again, you can look up information about that. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a list of abbesses online anywhere. There doesn't seem to be an online archive of that kind of thing, so I've no idea who this particular lady abbess was, but something very intriguing did turn up, that one of the nuns escaped from the abbey, and in 1909 wrote a book called The Escaped Nun about her experiences at St Mary's Abbey. So, you know, you can look that up for yourself. The process begins with pulling the text block, in other words, separating the cover from the pages. Splitting the end papers is maybe the most delicate part of this process, because any mistakes made with that very sharp scalpel will result in holes in the covering leather that then can't be repaired, or not easily anyway. I dampened the spine just a little to reactivate the old dried glue and make the spine a little easier to peel off, but it was still difficult work. Even with that dampening, you can see plenty of the black suede, the inside of the leather, still stuck to the spine, along with the 5 raised bands on the spine as well. All that gunk has to come off, so the text block gets sandwiched between 2 spare boards that I have, just to protect the text block, and that goes into the finishing press. This really is a handy bit of kit, and it's like a bookbinder's extra pair of hands. I applied a clear paste to the spine, kind of like wallpaper paste really. It holds a lot of moisture, but it isn't going to soak into the pages, which would obviously be a bad idea. I left this to dampen for a few hours, because this old glue is notoriously stubborn. And this is every bookbinder's least favourite part of the process, because it's gross. Even after hours with paste on it, it's still a little tough to get it started. But eventually the old spine linings start to prise off, and if you're lucky, the whole thing kind of peels away. And I could finally dispose of the old end bands and the stubs of those broken ribbons. Those black diagonal markings you can see on the spine are sometimes called signatures, and they're there so the publisher or binder can quickly see if any of the pages are out of order while they're making the book the first time. Finally, after all that, I can actually start work on the replacement ribbons. I cut them to size, cut new end bands as well, so everything's ready before I start relining the spine. But before all that, the first step in reassembly is to attach or tip on the new end papers. Rather than replace like for like, I thought I'd give this client a bit of an upgrade and replace them with nicer marbled papers. Getting the end papers on first also adds a protective layer to the pages of the book, which is going to be handled quite a lot during this process, so we don't want to damage the actual pages of the book. Unlike the other parts going on at this stage, I trim the end papers while they're on the text block, so they're the exact right size. It's much more accurate than trying to take measurements and cut them to size and then attach them to the text block. Now everything's ready to start building the spine back up again. The adhesive here is EVA rather than PVA, which is even more flexible than bookbinder's PVA when it's dry. The first spine lining is calico, or fraught it's sometimes called, a starchy material that gives real support to that spine and lies under the end papers as well, so you'll never see that. On top of that lining go the new ribbons, and on top of them the new end bands. I always put a little arrow on the lining so I know which way is the top of the book. Gluing the ribbons to the bottom of a book isn't a complete disaster, it's just really annoying. To finish the spine work, a layer of craft paper sandwiches everything in place, since it's got a bit more stretch and can conform to the contours of ribbons and end bands. And then the new raised bands sit on top of that. Everything is now set for the final part of this restoration called casing in, which is attaching the book cover to the text block. With this one, it starts with lining up the new raised bands with corresponding spaces on the cover spine. For this adhesive, I've actually used a mix of bookbinder's PVA and wheat starch paste, a very traditional bookbinding glue for working with leather. Mix, as it's simply called, just gives me a little more time to work before it dries, compared to straight PVA, which does dry pretty quickly. For precise work like this, especially with leather, it's best not to be in a rush, since you only get one shot at it, and if I'd gotten it wrong, I'd have to go all the way back to the start and peel the spine off again and do everything all over again. Obviously keen to avoid that. Last of all, the end papers are pasted out, as we say, but here I'm actually using straight bookbinder's PVA. Gently working the paper into the contours of the case so the book will open properly when in use. After this, it's pressed in my nipping press and left to dry under weights so it sets perfectly flat. And here you can see the finished St Andrews Daily Missal. This was not a straightforward project. I guess the best projects never are, but it was an interesting one and an enjoyable one. And I think you can see that the owner has got a lot of value out of the work they asked me to do, when you consider they said, oh, it's just the ribbons that need replacing. They've got not just the 4 nice new ribbons, but also new stripy end bands. The red and the gold, I think, go very well with the existing gilding that's survived on the edge of this missal, which is really wonderful to see, a nice original feature. I've replaced the plain old black end papers, which seem to be ubiquitous in missals of this era, with just nice new marbled end papers. And the thing that I'm most pleased with, it has to be said, I am very pleased with myself for having done this, recoloured, redyed the leather on the spine, given it a feed, as we say, with the conservation leather dressing, and that's just going to keep this leather supple and the missal usable for many years to come, is my hope. And kind of supporting that goal, the new slipcase as well. I know I haven't really gone into detail about the slipcase. I do love making slipcases and boxes, other kinds of boxes. It's very satisfying. So I think I'll probably do a separate video about that process at some point in the future. But, you know, it's just simple, plain, black. It's going to keep the book when it gets thrown in a bag or thrown on the passenger seat of the car as you're rushing out to mass. You know, this is what happens to hand missals. So the box is going to take the brunt of that punishment and keep the book in working order for years to come. So what I would say is, if there's something on your shelf or in a sacristy cupboard somewhere that's looking a bit old and a bit tired, or even in a worse state than that, if it's practically unusable, let me know, because no doubt there is something I can do about it. Don't just write it off as being unusable. I would point you towards a blog post that I wrote where I restored a 1962 altar missal, huge thing, held together by tape. All the missal tabs down the side had torn away and caused damage to the pages sometimes. It was in a real state. I'll put a link to that in the description below. And I've got a video coming up and a project coming up where I'm restoring the Manual of Prayers, another very interesting Catholic publication from the 1950s this time, that my parish priest likes to use. But it's a pain because there are many loose pages, many torn pages, torn in several places on each page. It's going to take a lot of work to bring that back into regular use. But I'll get into the reasons for that in the in that video. So if that kind of thing is of interest to you, please subscribe, please hit the notification bell. That's going to make YouTube remind you when I upload the video next time. This bookbinding work takes a long time. Making these videos takes a long time. There isn't going to be a new episode every day or every week even, probably. but I hope that they're of enough quality that you'll want to come back and take a look at the next one. And let me know in the comments. I'm new to this. Let me know in the comments what you enjoyed about this, what you'd like to have seen more of, and I'll endeavour to, include you in what it is that I'm doing. That's the whole point of doing this. So until next time, here endeth the blog. Go in peace.